Okay, so I have some things I'm going to say in my presentation, and then I'm curious what questions you all will have. So this exhibition is a study in the poetics of commonplace, conductive materials and relationships between human and non-human, animate and inanimate, questioning how we as urban dwellers might relate in new ways with our own elementally rich at-home terrain. The work in the room does not consist of individual works so much as objects, processes, and stories that respond to the room and to place. Rogers Park, Chicago, rural Iowa, Colorado, rural Ohio, and the materials we walk on, the water we drink, the wires in our homes and in our phones. So exhibition spaces have a kind of animism. For me, being attentive to this is key. The design materiality of the space sets the terms of engagement. It's always been important for me to become familiar with how perception is orchestrated. Spaces like closets, vents, pipes, windows, doorways, holes, moldings, the insides of walls, what makes up or is beneath the floor. For me, these places can be the most interesting sites of research. And when exhibition spaces are treated as neutral, there's a missed opportunity. And the work I'm involved with in this show is a process of work often devouring itself, constantly transforming. It's rarely solid or even solidly work until the moment of exhibition, which captures various objects and processes in relational terrain. And many of these objects will not stay consistent after this exhibition. Each component of the work bears a story or many stories that come together in conversation. And while I can't fully share all of those in one artist talk, some background can be given to shine a light on what has happened here. Stories of personal encounters with material resonate for me, especially when something subtle is revealed about a person's relationship with mortality and with life cycles, and materiality often points to these themes. I like to make and include lists of how I came into the materials and where they come from in relationship to what they are and what they were. Many items within the work were collected or offered over based on resonances I don't fully understand. The interplay with imagination is slippery, but also a productive place to think about dynamics. Memories, attachments, symbolic meanings, and projections are always in active relationship with the objects. Some of the materials in the show, I thought it would be helpful to maybe just read a list, and we'll go through and you can see what you can identify. River clay from Madison County, Iowa, a process from river stones, asphalt covered copper cones, animal cremains, muslin burlap, linen and thread, bird's nest mud, compressed with a warbler embedded, clay cone casts, beaver chewed branch with copper leaf, pyrite sun, pyrite sand, asphalt covered traffic cones, that's twice. Rat traps, coffered leafed, hand railing, copper leafed, bird's nest mud, wedge shelf, wax copper plaster, potting soil and grass cones, pyrolyzed bone char, hand processed from Iowa wildlife, fiberboard ceiling panels and bird spikes, asphalt stones from Lake Michigan, Iowa River shale from Madison County, copper resin, stones wrapped in Green River clay soaked gauze, clay-covered deer tail from Oconto County, turtle remains, clay-covered skunk skin, asphalt surfaced fiberboard ceiling panels, copper leaf ceiling, drain hole, copper foil, bird spikes, asphalt saturated wool felt, charcoal fiberglass screen, copper leaf doorknobs and locks, pyrolyzed moose droppings biochar, and an asphalt corner cast. I'm gonna go through. Okay, so I'll put the piece in context of time, COVID-19 lockdown. I go jogging several times a week in the St. Boniface Cemetery in Andersonville. Here I can avoid the unmasked, and I have my own breathing room during lockdown while sharing space with one single deer that seems to have become stranded after wandering in during stay-in-place orders, since making the graveyard his home. Here the raptors come to hunt, and I recognize a familiar form found in this exhibition, the cone, planted in front of individual graves for holding flowers offered to the deceased, And this somewhat sets the stage for the moment. Fast forward to Rome and Susan, where I take on a June pandemic residency as a time to do research. And I began to love the water damaged ceiling, increasingly contrasting a disdain for the carpeted floor. The site is just a skip away from Lake Michigan, just down the street from Rome and Susan. Strong electrical currents move right next to, within, and above the space. On the train platform, urban geological crystals can be found along the wall below the red line CTA. Roots down to the street respond to water by breaking concrete, slow insistence. And common urban forms are quiet sites of death and material transformation. Abstract animal forms and uncanny stalactites make up the perimeter. And water becomes one of the key elements determining the work. Although its presence is primarily seen through absence, the Iowa River clay window piece is the residue of water applied to dust to slip, dripping down and making river-like tributaries along the surface of the glass. I would say that water is the primary conductor of the show. Its physical absence from the show points to the importance of something beyond visible. I'll show you some images of this. From the outside, inside, and then a close-up of the outside view. The gap at the bottom of the window. That's when it's still wet. Asphalt also sets the stage. The carpet is wrapped and covered over with it, bringing the outside and inside, the top down, in a reversal. The traffic cone becomes enveloped in the asphalt surface, flagging a dominant material presence that's not only the site of animal and other ecological deaths, but now it's made up of them. The cone is. Contentious and loaded, made of fossilized bodies, asphalt is the ground of the work, the site, the ground of our urban lives, the roads that interrupt non-human passageways, the space that keeps water out, and the ground encrusted and separate from us everywhere we go. Fast forward to 2018, Madison County, Iowa, where I'm invited to make work along the Middle River near the Hollowell covered bridge. And these are heron prints. They're very large, so I can tell they're great blue heron feet, right near where I found the clay. My host Kevin shows me stones from the landscape that are eroding into the creek that are actually green clay and red clay and amalgamations of both. Here you see two cones from the show, two pieces of linen sewed into a V shape where the slip from these stones has been poured into them, and then the slip solidifies at the bottom into this cone form. Back to Rome and Susan, where we're still in the pandemic. I'm thinking about electricity from the train platform above, and also virus transmission. Copper speaks to both. Copper is used for conduction in wires, microchips, but it also purifies water, resists viruses and bacteria, and should naturally be the gatekeeper into the space. So I copper leaf the knobs and the handrail first thing. There's also a tiny hole in the ceiling where Roman Susan allows water to come through the ceiling so that it doesn't pool and destroy the ceiling further. This is copper leafed as well. Altered traffic cones mark the entrance and the descent into the space, which is below ground. Also, these copper cones, wax soil casts flank the entrance. These are initially modeled after the solo cup. This is the paper cup that holds water, as well as the grave cone that you find in the graveyard. Also the ceiling of the window niche. Clay casts, here's a collapsed bird's nest with the bird inside, and a copper gilded beaver chewed stick that leads towards the river clay windows. And this little stick somehow was chewed by on both sides. It's found by my hosts in Iowa and given to me. Also a pyrite sun piled on top with pyrite dust. And these are mined from southern Illinois. They look like sand dollars, but they're made of pyrite and they grow on top of coal. The copper railing leads us down into the room, which sits below street level. And you find rat traps, 2 rat traps extracted from their function, in contrast with this gilded entrance, site of exterminations. And these I found, this one was actually destroyed in the street. The other one I found near Loyola, and one of them still had the poison in it, but I don't know their full history. The rat traps, copper strips, and ceiling tiles are gripped by bird spikes designed to keep birds away from architecture. Here they're flipped for suspension. Contained on the spikes, on top of the strips, are various kinds of animal matter wrapped in river clay. You also find river slate, cremated animal bones, stones, and other material. You can tell that the light through the windows really changes the exhibition throughout the day. Stone cones flank both sides of the space, one with horsebone cremains from Amish horses and one with river clay slit poured in to dry. The bone cones relate to the heat of the radiator and the biochar bones underneath. The slip cones with the clay and the water resonating from the windows. And then above at the entrance, you can see the nest mud wedge at the entrance made from birds' nests. The processed animal bones contrast with the asphalt floor, the bone char carbon black, or the calcium and phosphorus cremain white. Back to Madison County. I think about nests as a story of relationship. Bones, feathers, and nests, these natural items often hold kind of stubborn symbolic meanings. There's a myth that has to be contended with in working with them. So I like to change the form to make them disintegrate or lose shape, such as in the nest mud wedge and these capsule and these other uses of it. Sometimes the material, it's helpful to pull the material out of the form to think about the object in a new way, see new things in it, and consider the material differently. This relates to language too. What counts as a nest? Is it the cup form, or is it the stuff, or is it the process? Is it the story? Is it all of that? For both humans and non-humans, materials break down as we build. Relational qualities of object in transit. Beaver branch, mouth as a chisel, into the river for structure amidst fluidity. And clay becomes a container often to hold bodies, whether it's fired or not. And it shows the presence and absence of water at the same time. Rewind back to 2011 to explain a little bit about use of bones and involvement with animals. Here you find an encounter with an earlier deer found on the side of the road, mostly decomposed at an acre residency in Wisconsin. I recently started considering the benefits of breaking down and altering forms of natural objects and thinking about pulverizing them, asking a question of essence. So with this deer, the body became abstract as the specific bones were crushed into piles of bone matter. I started to become curious about this as an abstraction, curious about bringing the body back to the site of the damage. So here's where the deer was found, and then I made it into dust and distributed it on site at the space where I found the deer. This is what it looked like before. after I broke the bones down, before breaking them down into a finer dust and sifting them. Around the same time, going back to graduate school here, I started experimenting with cremation as a way of releasing the forms of the bones. It's a kind of funerary gesture. Also thinking about fire as a method of material transmutation. The birds fly out of the form with the smoke from the fire. It was a public event, this one, my MFA critique. And the colors of the ashes kind of formally echo asphalt and concrete, which sometimes contain ashes. I'd also just started learning bird taxidermy, which is a painstaking process of careful dissection and reconstruction. It's a very intensive study in animal form, animal skin, and also grieving. At the Nature Museum where I learned, I often had to introduce death to children by way of the public taxidermy demonstration, where they could ask me questions as they cleared up misunderstandings. No, this is not alive. No, I'm not hurting it. Yes, it is dead. Fast forward a year to 2011, Herald Arts residency near Chester Hill, Ohio, where I became reacquainted with my Amish heritage, partly through visiting Amish farms and gathering horse bones from these farms. The bones were so heavy and so massive that merely carrying them around was a weight-bearing activity that pointed to the labor of the horses themselves, still the contemporary bearers of Amish labor, precursor to the motorized vehicle in a time before asphalt. Years later, beginning to feel burdened by the bones, by the horse bones, I found ways to process them by cremating them to porcelain level temperatures, burning out all the carbon entirely, leaving a white, pure looking material behind, and loosening the density needed to carry the massive weight of the horse's own bodies, as well as the structures they pulled and people they pulled. And for some reason in the kilns, the bones turned blue on the outside, which was kind of a magical surprise. I think because of the mineral content that was left on them. In a meditation on the weight-bearing nuances and on Amish horses, I made a path from these cremains in 2017. This is at sector 2337. That's no longer there, but this picture's by Claire Britt. You could walk on the path or next to the path, but it's entirely made of horse bones and leads to this brick wall. Going back a little bit to talk about biochar and pyrolization. This is a process I learned when I was in Iowa in 2018 with the help of my host, Kevin, whose land this is. And basically you make a fire inside of a bin and burn the bones in an oxygen-free, nearly oxygen-free environment. There's just small ventilation holes. I talked to a researcher at Iowa State University when about the process. I was doing research at the time about water and soil in Iowa. And he spoke with me a lot about the loss of prairie land, the denuding of the landscape, the natural formation of prairie potholes as a way that the landscape's trying to self-correct, but the problems of nitrates, phosphorus, ammonia, pesticides, and erosion that are creating big problems in Iowa and also causing problems for Iowa water. I also spoke with the researcher Debbie Owler at ISU, who acquainted me with the value of biochar as a soil amendment and in use in ancient practices, as well as contemporary soil remediation. Terra preta soil was used in Brazil, showing that biochar was used as soil amendment a long time ago. It also, once made, it creates a smokeless fire with zero emissions. Burning it, she told me burning it is actually carbon negative. And it creates these really beautiful animal bone forms that I'm not very comfortable showing because they're so visually enticing, and I'm interested in the bones in a different way and kind of glorifying the beauty of the form in this way. But I'm showing them in the presentation. So this process of pyrolization calls cremation practices into question for me. It makes me think there might be a generosity in spreading ashes that are pyrolyzed, that go into more of a healing relationship with water and soil. I'm not really a practical person when it comes to the things I'm trying to do with my work, but I think this question is kind of an interesting one. It also speaks to what abstraction does to material. With bone char, it's used for water filtration. And the charcoal material is somewhat mystified. We don't see the animal in the bone so that we won't be grossed out that our water is passing through a dead body. But it's the purest purification system. It absorbs all kinds of things. It's interesting too, students always often ask me where to find bones for their work, and they totally forget that they're in your chicken, they're at the grocery store, they're on the street already. They tend to want to buy them and not find them, which I find interesting. Makes me think that we have an idea of what a bone is that's very romantic. This is the window back in the space. Yeah, this is animal dung. It's moose dung. It's been pyrolyzed into pellets, basically, from moose droppings. I'm interested in the expectations and associations of material. This is probably cleaning the air in the room even, because it's so absorptive, but people are really disturbed that they're moose droppings, and another twist. Those were actually taken from Colorado land that is actually currently on fire, which is kind of a weird resonance. Hopefully the fires go out soon. And a couple more things about taxidermy. The taxidermy in the show is present, but it's obscured beneath the clay. And I'm interested in this as a way of kind of obscuring the image and provoking to dig a little deeper. It creates a little bit of mystery, but it also kind of protects the image. Think about funerary practices and how sometimes it's more respectful to not see. This is a deer tail. And just to share a little background, this is my friend Owen, who's the owner of Morgan Taxidermy in Mountain, Wisconsin, who gave me these deer pelts in exchange for showing him some methods of skull casting and alginate. He had an unusual request that he needed help with. It was actually kind of tragic. A two-headed calf was born and somebody wanted to preserve it. But Owen's taught me how to further consider how complicated and taxidermy and hunting is and what it does. Often his clients don't buy any meat at all from factory farms. The relationship of the hunter to the animal is challenging, but it's also necessary to understand, especially in contrast with store-bought meat and food cycles. There's a lot of misperceptions of the mad scientist with taxidermy, and I found it's actually people who are extremely reverent towards nature are the only ones who are able to do it, because it takes so much work and concentration and craft. Yeah, as my work has developed over the years out of a love of animal form, I started to become suspicious that it was a symbolic death to kind of make unmoving. I worried I was participating in symbolic violence or imprisoning the objects in my care by forcing them into static life. The answer was difficult but simple. Obscure, speed up entropy. I wanted to see how this affected the meaning I attribute to these things by putting the material back into movement. I'm at a point now where very little is preserved for longer than a limited period of time unless I'm really certain as to why it's necessary. The cards I sent out of the mail for the exhibition are for an elemental experience of the work and maybe a remediation to the pixels. If you want a card, please let me know. Material connection is a key component of the project, considering the ways we're kind of digitally interacting so much right now. The clay particles do scatter in the mail. I think the postal machines scraped the top surface a little bit. So the image erodes in transit, which seems appropriate for the fact that it's river clay and it's traveling and dispersing all throughout. So let us know if you would like one and we will mail you one. Overall, the show is calling attention to a need for mourning subtle and not so subtle losses of reciprocal and respectful relationships between humans and non-humans. The questions I'm left with, how do we mentor? And this is partly influenced by things I've been reading, Bachelard's Elements, listening to James Hillman's lectures, especially the ones on alchemy. And yeah, how do we mentor grief rather than heroics? How do we reanimate what we've become anesthetized to? And kind of be more attentive to our material reality. So that's what I have in terms of formal introduction. I don't want to trap you in Zoom presentation mode. So maybe if we have questions, I can stop share for a moment. I can see you all. Oh my gosh. Aaron Hughes Brown, my high school art teacher, is here. Wow, that's cool. This is the miracle of Zoom, I guess, right? Oh, and my family, Christy and Dan and Ruth are there. Wow, okay. Very cool. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. I just wanted to say that we dropped our email address in the chat. If you want a postcard, just send us your address and we'll coordinate with Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so if anybody wants to talk about anything in particular, we can pull up a slide, or if you want to just chat about anything related to the work or the show, you can turn on your mic or you can type in the chat. Or you can plant a seed and I'll just keep talking about something.
We're going to ask you a question to start, if that's okay.
Yeah, break the ice.
Yeah. I was curious about a couple of the materials you used, because it seemed like a bit of a break, or like bringing fabricated materials into contact with all of these materials you've not bought in, when you're talking about buying bones. And then there's some things like the industrial products of asphalt, and there's a compressed ceiling tile and the bird spikes. And I'm just wondering if you want to talk about the relationship between these like preformed materials that you repurpose and turn on their head in relation to the organic materials.
Yeah, I mean, there's such human objects, and I objects that materials that I have such a contentious relationship related to the things that I find. And yeah, I think the ability to, the cheapness of the materials is interesting too, which is part of the process, I suppose, like going to Home Depot and going through the process of maybe what it means to install these ceiling tiles and how flaky and awkward they are. Maybe mimicking the process of what it means to lay asphalt and what it means to, I think, I guess my answer is about engagement. Like going through the process of installing materials is a way of getting to know them and really figuring out what they are. And that takes time. Like there's no way I don't think there's a way to get to know a material without really spending time with it. And sometimes that time is really unconscious. Like we walk around on asphalt all the time, but shoveling it, like lugging 40-pound buckets around and shoveling it with a trowel is a different kind of thing. Getting on your hands and knees and wiping asphalt completely across the surface of the floor is a different thing. So yeah, it took me a minute to realize my answer for that, but that's it. Definitely about the process of engagement, and purchasing, I think, is maybe a part of that, how commercially available things are versus, you know, things that are just a given that will appear, like a bird's nest. People will still buy those in collection shops and things like that, but it kind of drives me nuts. I don't like it. Yeah. Oh, hi, Iris. My niece is waving to me from Dan Beachy Quick House. Thank you for that question, though. That's a good question. Yeah, it made the room, if you're not aware of, you haven't been in the show, most of you have not been, some of you have. It made the room smell really strongly of asphalt, which was kind of evoked the presence of the material as well. And that kind of goes along with it being fresh. Asphalt that's been sitting for ages doesn't have the same quality of activating the senses, I guess. Yeah. And what is held hierarchy? What hold and what is held hierarchy? Megan is asking if you have any rules for yourself around choices of materials. Yeah. How do I choose materials? I think I'm most interested in materials that are involved in some kind of process, that have an interesting story, but that I feel like I can relate to and understand directly. There's a lot of complicated materials that I don't understand at all, like, I don't know, Formica, or trying to think of, doesn't mean that I don't use them necessarily if I don't understand them. I'm looking at Marissa. I know you have a long list in your head because you're smiling of complicated materials. You can feel free to get on the mic if you want to. She's just quietly laughing in the muted Zoom space.
Calling me out, Beachy.
Hey, you know, I can see your face. It's nice.
Thank you for the show, by the way. I did have the opportunity to visit it, and to Nathan for opening it. And I think there's some more questions coming up, but I also was really, actually, there's a nice question about water, and I don't know if you intended it or not, but water stuck in. I think the pipes were starting to drip onto the bones biochar. I think the temperature changed, and there's also quite a sound. And I don't know, it sounds like you spent a lot of time meeting up in residence with the exhibition, but it's very alive, to say the least. But there was some sneaky water.
Oh yeah, I think it rained recently. Maybe that's it. Yeah, because the window's been left open. The power and absence of water in the exhibit, Lou asks. Yeah. Apparently it was a little more present than I realized for one person at least. But yeah, I mean, water is so crucial and so fluid, right? You can't, it's not easy to hold on to, and it's at risk. So that's something that I'm thinking about. I mean, in terms of like personal health, I changed the type of water I was drinking, and it totally changed my health. There's just paying attention to it has been really interesting. I don't know if that answers the question. Maybe we'll wind back around to it another way. Can you talk more of art as an ethical experiment? Yeah, repair, honesty, despair. Good question, Dan. I know you've written about this too, quite a bit. I think about the process of engaging with material as so important, and the moment of presentation is the art, but the process behind it is kind of what I'm trying to talk about and show. And for me, that often involves really spending the time. So that's what the research has been in taxidermy, but the research spent in taxidermy and in collection has also taught me that there's something problematic about collecting, especially formerly living beings. And especially the way that they're presented in museums and in displays that kind of make dioramas, and you know, we get uncomfortable with Egyptian mummies, but not with taxidermy displays. And I think what's interesting about that, though, is that the process of taxidermy is such a deep investigation into animal bodies and into what it means to kind of work with death. And so I'm kind of strange in that I love the process of taxidermy and I don't always like the objects. Because, I mean, bird taxidermy, recently somebody asked me to work on something for them recently, and I said, you know, okay, but that might take me like 3 sessions of like 6 hours. And she was really surprised. And I was like, that's just how long bird taxidermy takes. Like, it takes a long time. And this simple little object results. So there's something about devotion, giving your devotion, giving your time, and giving your attention, which takes really intensive like focus. So that's really important as well. The amount of focus that it takes to do it and to do it well is so counter to the way it's perceived. And I think there's a lot we could talk about ethics and material and repair, caring for the dead, caring for bodies. What does it mean to do an act of care? How you exhibit it matters. How you bring it into conversation matters. Letting it decay is more honest maybe than saving it forever. Yeah, I'm not sure how articulate that was, but we'll wind back around with it. But yeah, Veronica has a comment. I love how your work deals with alchemy, magic, protection, inner, outer landscape to create your own. I was curious about the geographies you engaged with to create this exhibition, and I'm curious how you decided to plan the exhibition to embody its own geography, map, and place. That starts with just spending a lot of time there. I think the artist residency that Roman Susan offered, I think I was there for about 3 weeks. That was really research. And it was a lot of me making a lot of things that I didn't use at all, and playing with clay and walking around the neighborhood and sitting in the space, making myself be in the space for hours every day. And then, you know, after a while, start to get a sense of what the space wants to do. And that's just a matter of time spent. So I really appreciate when there's several times now that I've been able to have access to a space for a prolonged period of time to really research it. And then those residencies too enable that time to kind of spend with place and see what's interesting that wants to come out of it. But a lot of times I collect things and I don't know what's going to happen until there's a moment where it can get distilled into an exhibition. Roman Susan also gave me like 3 weeks to install, so that was super helpful. Yeah. I was wondering if the exhibition is elegiac for what we've lost or is an expansion and embrace of our built world through attention. That's lovely. Yeah, I think both. I think by better attention, there's more that is possible, but we can't skip past the grief part, if that makes sense. And to claim to have any answers doesn't make any sense at all. I'm not saying everybody should copper leaf their doorknobs, but you know, the copper does seem kind of like a more expansive kind of part of the exhibition, maybe. And I don't always use bright colors, so at first I thought it was extremely gaudy and bright for my normal style, so it was kind of fun. Yeah, those are the questions in the chat. Does anybody want to say anything else? Go ahead.
On that note, I was really curious to hear you speak a little more about the brightness. I was really struck by both what I know in your work from a longer time, the kind of the processing and the grief and the heaviness. But there's also a lot of humor I felt and play, like an intense density of things happening, a lot of things around at the peripheral of your vision or out of the corner of your eye, and quite a few notes to the show. It felt really I were to talk about it compositionally, like yeah, like there's just a lot of notes being hit, and every way I turned there was another kind of set of sounds perhaps, or feelings that I was getting. So I'm curious in that expansion, because even the way the pigeon spikes were turned upside down as legs was quite humorous to me. I don't know if you find that humorous as well, but things were moving and sneaking around corners and doing things while sitting very, very still. I was kind of struck by those, as well as the smells and sounds and all those going on.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of funny too. Like the handrail is really funny to me too. I made it like twice as long. It's a really long handrail. And the rat traps are just kind of almost too much, but you know, like why not make them into little temples? It's just fun to kind of feel out the space, and also, you know, be like, there's something funny about going around and picking up old traffic cones that have been run over. And somebody came by and called them witches' hats, these girls walking by, like, oh, that's so cute, it's Halloween, you put out witches' hats. So I was like, I guess that's got a goth humor in it somewhere, maybe, but yeah, I appreciate that, the humor. Yeah, maybe I think this show, if I was going to talk about trajectory, is a little lighter in a way, and I'm not sure how that happened. But yeah.
I appreciate it. It's been a heavy year, and the work has that elegiac quality, the kind of grieving, but then also at the same time, I found myself just very, yeah, there's something else going on that was really exuberant as well, which I was thinking about these processes of grief and the different stages as well, or what we pass through.
Thanks, Marissa. Anyone else want to come on the mic?
I wanted to say, can you hear me okay? Hi,
yeah.
Rebecca.
Hi.
I can't wait to come and see it in person this weekend. And when you spoke, there's such a reverence you have that I've just always loved in your work, for the living being that once was, you know, and that just it's so unbelievably inventive to continue to turn them into these other things. And it just sort of it just blows my mind. And then what I kept thinking about is the bones that you don't usually show, because they become gorgeous, the black bones, and that balance between making light of their body, you know, you never will do that, and how to show, you know, that you dug up the horse bones and continue to change them over and over and over. And I just have there's such great respect, but then where does it like, how did you come to that? I guess that you, like, okay, that won't work because they're beautiful, and because it does just glorify them in a way that's almost not respectful, that we're just sort of, you know, glaring at their remains.
Well, I love that question coming from you, because I know you. Sorry, Colleen. Oh, you're still there. You can keep talking. I didn't know I was interrupting you.
No, I was just sort of trailing off, but ready to hear what you had to say. I was going to say, I don't know if there's a question, but then you said there's a question. So keep going.
Yeah, no, I love that comment and the question, the implicit question or whatever, coming from you, especially because if you don't know Colleen's work, she's a photographer and more lately making films of really kind of difficult animal subject matter. Check out her work online if you don't know about it, Colleen Plum. But yeah, the answer is that I've messed up a bunch, and I've realized that that's how I've learned, by doing things that I wish I hadn't done. And it's starting with the way I collected animals, the way I processed skins, the way I saved things, and then felt weird about it. And I think that process is going to continue. Like, maybe, recognition of making mistakes is really important in the growth of the work. Not to say that I'll get to a point where I become pure or something, but the first rule is to engage with it. And by engaging with it, you're going to make mistakes. And, my goal is just be sensitive to what I'm doing, and watch as it wants to change. So yeah, flexibility and fluidity in that.
Yeah, that's really well said, and that it so humble, and that it kind of just reveals the absolute complicatedness of what it means to be a human on this earth, amidst other living beings, and how we can grapple with who has what space. That the hunters are the ones who, my daughter was dating a hunter, who I've hosted in my house, like a hunter, and it turns out he won't eat meat that is store-bought like that. And it's it's confusing. It's like, so that those questions can be in there and fraught with, or that we all are fraught with these questions of, how do we live? How do we do this? And so maybe that openness, or trying our best, is all we can do.
It's so much more complicated than I think, asking questions of these animal relationships, which is something I know you're really deeply invested in. So you totally get, there's so many quick, like, this is bad kind of responses to animals and to death. And it's just because people don't want to engage. And we anesthetize ourselves to it, partly because it's too much, like going to the grocery store is such an intense experience, but you have to do it every week, and it's not just the meat, it's the everything. Right. So slowing down and paying time with things is so helpful. And that's exactly what hunters do. They track in the woods. I'm not saying all hunters are the same, but tracking an animal in the woods and getting to know its habitat and its smells and its sounds, and having to process the meat yourself is just a completely different relationship with animals, that when you eat the animal is so much more knowledgeable of what's going on, and of relationship. And so I think moral superiority is like impossible to have for anybody, but I respect that level of engagement that from people you wouldn't necessarily expect to have it. Yeah, and so often with the taxidermy too, like learning about the stories being so important for the people who get the animals mounted. And in the way that I've talked to Owen about it, he's not necessarily telling me stories of trophies. He's telling me stories of the last hunt you did with your grandfather, and the deer that lasted you through the year that was in the freezer, and the pelt that's now on your bed as your deer blanket. And it's like so intimate that it's not the same as the kind of taxidermy you think of, where people are just kind of machine gunning animals in Africa and like making these colonialist demos in their homes and museums. I think the variety is interesting and kind of important too. And the craft is just amazingly complicated. Thanks, Colleen. Yeah.
Thank you.
I heard a breath. You have another thing to say? No.
Well, I have lots of things to say, but if anyone else has a question, this leads maybe in a totally different direction than you were just talking about, but I was curious about the kind of mimetic. There seemed to be a lot of things that were mimicking things, like the cone came in many different forms. And I know you've processed materials kind of from one stage or transitional element into another, but then there's this other formal mimicry, or like things were sliding in another register as well around the space from one material to the next, but based on form, not on kind of material transformation. So yeah, I was curious about these kind of like, it seemed like there are multiple plays and things kind of becoming other things in a really interesting way that I hadn't seen before in your work.
Yeah, the cone has baffled me for a while, and I didn't notice the funeral cone until recently, even though I'd been making the cones for a bit. I guess it started with the solo cup, thinking about water and the solo cup, and just kind of weirdly loving solo cups. I ordered a bunch of those paper cups and was just kind of interested in them as just a wrapped paper form, but I think that for the cones, like the filter became a thing. Like literally, that's how I would filter the clay, or the bones sometimes go through sieves that are similarly shaped. It's also such a downward directed tunnel or an upward directed form. And like when I was in Rogers Park walking around, you see the stalactites from the train platform with like the gross encrusted whatever that's coming from the train. That's like this magical, disgusting thing. And then at the bottom, they also reach up. So that's also kind of a mirroring that's interesting to me. And there's something in that about form and, language and mirroring, like the particular with the idea. And I'm not sure, I haven't teased it out yet, but yeah, the floppy cones that are filled with bone cremains, the white ones. Those came from doing sewing for the jacket project I was working on, and thinking about sleeves. And I had pet rats at one point, and they would crawl into my sleeves and tunnel in there. And then I was at this residency. I weirdly found some voles. No, they're the little guys I can't see. Are they voles or moles? They're tiny. Anyway, there was a bunch on the lawn one day at this residency in Germany, and I went out there and I was interacting with one, and it was really friendly, and it just crawled right into my sleeve of my sweatshirt. And I was like, this is really weird. And it reminded me of my rat Sophia, and it was kind of the same color. And then somehow, like, from the shape of a collar to the jacket sleeve to the bones, somehow the cones started partly from that too. It's just all these resonances. And the more I was like making notes about my work and seeing if I could succinctly try to talk about it for this lecture, I was thinking about how there's so much lyricism going on that it's really hard to like connect all the dots. It's like a big constellation that everything's bouncing around.
I like that word, lyricism, because I think that's why I was trying to describe the show in terms of notes or like a composition, because it did feel really particularly, I think, lyrical in the way it was kind of playing around the space and off of each other. And because I know there's one way in which you talk about your work often, in which things are procedural almost. A thing becomes another thing, becomes another thing, and loops back. And which is one really exciting, beautiful way to follow the work. But then this other kind of lyricism of things playing off of each other in really unexpected and illogical, yet connected, formal, playful ways. It's really enjoyable in this show.
Yeah, that's something that I've been better at developing over time, I think. If I see a progression, is the lyricism allowing it to come out a little bit. I think the procedure is a way in, like there's rules for how you dissect a bird, and then it gets weird later, but you follow the procedure and it takes you to the place where you're concentrating, which then opens up new ideas and new associations and spending time with things. So, yeah.
It's like a composition. It's like this lyricism. It's like the whole thing is a symphony of things that resonate with one another. And that's what I was thinking as you were describing each piece, that it was different notes creating this whole, it's an orchestra or something. I mean, I don't know why I kept thinking about it in terms of music. And I love how you describe everything. You describe what it is, and then there's no answer. That there's such an openness to each piece that you have in there, and that we're left as a viewer to put it together. And that's what's so fun about looking at it, and that you there's a million reasons, you know, and then on top of it, the moose droppings are cleaning the air, you know, like it's sort of this endless journey into each thing and how it became what it is. I could just listen to every story all day because there's so much thought put into it. And it's not something that, I mean, visually you can look at it and it's really fascinating. And the spikes going up, holding the rat, you know, thing, and just visually it's so fascinating, and rich. But then all of these stories, when, I mean, hearing about where the cone came from, that there's even more involved, is really fascinating. I mean, it's really inspiring. So thank you.
That's generous of you to say. What were you just mentioning that I wanted to touch back on? It'll come back to me. Oh, the moose droppings. I mean, partly like that's me kind of laughing at myself. I'm like, oh, dung is so fascinating, right? Like the animals are eating the landscape and processing it, and then they come out as these beautiful little round forms. And then what happens? They like mold in my studio and become disgusting. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Which I often have those moments. And then I'm like, okay, what do I do with these? Oh, perfect. I can like make them into biochar and it'll clean them and I get to keep the form. So there's push and pull about like wanting to keep the form and wanting to let it go. And that's interesting to me too. But just in terms of like your question earlier about like, how do you learn? It's by making weird mistakes. I mean, I hope I never get to the point where I stop taking risks and stop mailing myself moose poop from Colorado, but yeah. I see a question from Aaron Brown. Yeah. Who I know from, who's my high school art teacher. Oh my gosh. So great. How unexpected. I now live in the middle of Amish country in central Pennsylvania. I'm interested in your connection with that and your work. It just so happened when I was in Ohio that the residency I was at worked with the Amish community. And so they bought cinnamon rolls from them and like Amish pants. I bought a pair of those, like, you know, they're basically boys' Amish pants that the woman, Lydia, I think her name was, would alter for you for like $30. The barnyard pants. My dad's family was Amish, grew up Amish and became Mennonite. So I have photos of him going to like school with Amish kids. And I just think that there's like a lineage that I'm interested in there, with also where we are with how they managed to still be kind of a separatist community. And it's super problematic, but at the same time, a really interesting model for how, you know, how things could have or might have gone differently in terms of, you know, transportation that doesn't destroy the air and all of that. They have a complicated relationship with animals too, because I mean, I don't know, they might be close to their horses, but I know there's also a variety of ways that the relationships manifest with the animals, because their children are sometimes laborers too, you know. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the Amish are interesting. And
we have so many interactions around here too, because we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they're at our farmers markets, and it's interesting to observe the different interactions that they have, but there is still such a huge separation, even though they're everywhere. And I find that kind of fascinating. And then also very funny every time I see a buggy at Walmart or McDonald's.
yeah, I mean, you know, there's not as much purity in the community as you would think necessarily. Yeah, like they order their denim online, probably. I don't know. Maybe they
shop
call it
at Victoria's
catalog.
Secrets.
Yeah, that's a secret one. I don't know about that one.
That was one I couldn't help but laugh out loud when I saw that.
More comfortable maybe than the old fashioned kind. I don't know.
I don't know. I really wish I was close enough to actually go see the show, because it's been really fun to listen to you about it. And I love that you're still taking advanced risks with your artwork.
That's what you call it. I don't know. Thanks, Erin. Is there anything else people are thinking about that you want to talk about?
I had, I guess I was curious about the sort of the window piece, and how that was I guess created. There's this really, I went last Sunday or this past Sunday, and it was raining outside, and so the window to the right was kind of open, and so you could hear the water droplets. And then in looking at the glass, it was almost like this really surreal moment that was really beautiful. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how I guess that was made. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should go over there and take video when it rains, because I didn't think about that. It might be really interesting, like to have it actually wet behind the clay in a confusing way. But I basically just kind of mimicked rain by applying a slip to the windows and then spritzing it with water until the little channels started to form. And then kind of sweeping it up, onto plastic at that line, taping it off. But that piece wasn't necessarily a plan. It was kind of like a way to obscure the window view of what I was doing as I was installing. So I installed it first thing when I got in there, because I didn't want a bunch of looky-loos, seeing down on the street the whole time when I was, in the space. So, and then I was wondering whether I would keep it or not. And then I decided I really liked it. But initially I found it really pretty, and I was kind of confused by that. And I was like, is this okay? I made a pretty painting in the window, I think. But then it still kind of got that, the strangeness to it. So it's not totally off palette, but yeah, it's something I never done before. And then repeating it in the cards was really fun. And then also there was this moment of learning that the cards were being totally destroyed in the mail. And I was like, oh no. And then I said, oh wait, that's probably good, because this is what I wanted, right? Like, don't pin the butterfly, like just let the river of clay matter flow out and hopefully not clog up the mail sorting machines and ruin the election. So yeah, that was that was interesting. But I've been getting some pictures from people with their cards, what they look like when they get to them, and it's just like the mail sorting has created this kind of abrasive effect on the card that's kind of complicated but interesting, I guess. Maybe probably better than if they came. I had to think about, do I spray fix the surface? And I was like, no, that's totally wrong. Why would I do that? But it would keep the image and nobody would know. But I didn't. Yeah. You could wipe this off onto your skin, and these make really amazing face masks, the green clay. I think it's like that French green clay that you get in the fancy skin care places. You put it on and you wash it off and you're just like, this is the most amazing. So I guess there's kind of a magic to the clay too, just because of the way that I felt it working with it. I was using one of those rocks as like a bar of soap in a bucket of water at the residency. And I was like, this is like this amazing like ocean after I'm done rinsing it off. I think it's because it's got a lot of chlorophyll, like ancient fossilized chlorophyll or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, the green clay is, and the red clay is so rubbery. It's really different than regular terracotta. It's got that elasticity is really intense. I'm not a ceramicist, but I don't think you have to be. There are some ceramicists out there, at least Aaron Use Brown taught ceramics. Yeah. Cool. Mine arrived in beautiful condition, says Connie. Oh, that's great. Yeah, they're all different, I'm sure, those cards. Yeah, and I still have more if you want me to send you one. Just give us your address, me or Kristen. Okay. It's 8:15, but we can keep talking. Any other questions or things you guys want to get into? Kristen's thinking with her head tilted back. Nathan and Kristen, who are, by the way, amazing hosts. They're so generous for artists. Really appreciate it.
I'll ask you a question on that note, I guess.
Okay.
Thinking about the clay on the windows and a lot of the work in the room and the work that's outside of the room that you're not super vocal about being there in the world, I'm wondering about your relationship of like concealment and sort of teasing out what is there and what can be observed, and sort of like how much do you want people to work for their glimpse of what you are doing?
Oh yeah. Well, initially my plan was to embed all these things all over the neighborhood. I had this big ambition, and that it didn't really end up being my main interest. But there are some secret things around the space. But I'm interested in how material hides meanings and how material hides what it is. And so I like to replicate that as kind of a meditation on that sometimes. So like in the past, making the horse bones into a mortar to do tuck pointing and brick, or hiding something inside of a taxidermy object, and having maybe even somebody else give me something to hide inside a taxidermy object. There's something about like a mystery about what's embedded in things, what's inherent in things. I think Dan left, but he wrote a really beautiful little mini essay. Oh no, he's here, about that for my exhibition a couple years ago. Oh, Christy's there. That's my sister. But there's already such a mystery to materials, and I'm not going to claim to ever solve that, but I do like to play with it and maybe add to it, and also stories add to it as well. Like there was a little taxidermy sparrow in the New Capitol show I did years ago that had a little dream that Judith Brotman wrote inside of it, and I had it in this space, and somehow it disappeared, and I don't know where it went, but my imagination really went all over with that. Like, did a rat take it and carry it away? Did somebody sneak into the space and steal the bird? Like, what happened to the bird? It was very obviously like there, and then it was very obviously gone. And I guess like inspiring that mystery in other people is interesting to me too. And it's not something that I really focused on in this show as much, except for that you can't tell maybe what the wrapped objects are. Not as much as usual, I guess, but it is something that I don't want to kill the mystery. I want to create it sometimes. I think it's fun to have secrets. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question very well, but
No, fun to have secrets. I get it.
I think that, I mean, I guess I'm sort of startled by the materials as well, and kind of looking back at the shows the early shows where I was introduced to your work at New Capitol. I felt like that show was particularly concentrated on the relationship between the materials you were working with and the environment of the space, like the brick and the wood. And then when we worked at Loyola, you had this element of using like the acetate, the like reflective material on the floor. And then there was a relationship with the ceiling tile again. And I like that contrast, or like that tension between this sort of like super fabricated material and then the materials that you're taking from the ground or from the earth that are also sort of like fabricated in either like a time way or in the way that you're manipulating them with fire. And yeah, I mean, I feel like when we were talking about this show and the asphalt and the cones and like this presence of plastic is just kind of like a full circle, right? Because plastic is ubiquitous in our environment. It's something that we just like can't possibly get away from. And it's made from oil, which is made from fossils, which is made from, you know, basically like matter that was once conscious. And it's just yeah, I mean, it's at first it's kind of like a jarring comparison, but then when you really look at the big picture of it, it just
Yeah,
like
no, absolutely.
what you're doing.
Absolutely. That's the thing is it's important to in some ways it's important to try to really embrace subtlety, to slow down that process of recognition. And hopefully you get to the cone as plastic as coming from the fossil fuel processed into plastic that then becomes the road cone, that becomes like the site of the accident or the site of the repair or construction or something. But the jarringness, it's happened. And I think over time, like I've had to try to make the read a little slower. But then, then I also like to throw that out every once in a while. Like the moose droppings are just moose droppings, but I don't think necessarily people would know what those are unless I told them. So maybe it is still slow. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Rebecca, for your presentation, but also Q&A. It's always great when Q&As are actually lively, and I feel like this qualifies as that.
Yeah, this is a great presentation. It's been amazing to work with you, and very meaningful to hear more about your process and your work.
Well, and you're a part of my process too, because you've been through multiple iterations of it. So thank you for that. It takes flexible people who are willing to do the thing and give you the weird space and trust that you're going to be able to be respectful and inventive with it at the same time. And not, there's not everybody's willing to do that with exhibition spaces. That's something special. So to point that out, support Rome and Susan.